What kind of SuperAger are you? Go to AGEIST.com/quiz, take the SuperAger quiz, and we'll send you directed, personalized information to help you SuperAge the best that you can. Welcome to SuperAge. My name's David Stewart. I am the founder of AGEIST and your host on the SuperAge show. We talk about how to live healthier, how to live longer, and how to be happier. And who doesn't want that? Today's show is brought to you by Inside Tracker, the dashboard to your inner health. Go to insidetracker.com/ageist. Save 20% on all their products. Today's show is also brought to you by LMNT, my favorite electrolyte mix. It's what I put in my water in the morning, and it's what I put in my water at the gym. Go to drinkelement.com/ageist and receive a free 8-serving sample pack with any purchase. Today's show is also brought to you by Divi, hair care products specifically designed for men and women who are concerned with hair loss and scalp health. Go to diviofficial.com/ageist, save 20% off your first order. Welcome to episode 154 of the SuperAge podcast. It is so great to have you with us. This is going to be dropping on October the 4th, 2023. Coming to you this week from the very wet, rainy, wannabe snowy mountains of Utah. And, you know, as they say, the snows are coming. It's starting to get white up on top of the mountains, and that's an exciting time. So when we started AGEIST, which was, oh my gosh, almost 9 years ago, I was a photographer, and I thought, the thing that's really missing from all this discussion is what did people our age actually look like? Because we knew what they didn't look like. If you Googled image search people over 50 on Google, it was just abysmal. So I said, okay, well, I can create a catalog of that. But then I thought to myself, I really can't do that because even if I take 2 pictures a day, it's just going to take me forever to put together a library. So what did I do? I joined Tinder. What I did is I put my age at whatever the max was. I don't know, it was like 35 or 40 or something like that. And I used Tinder as my image library. So Tinder, don't sue me. I didn't do anything bad with you. So this is how it worked. If you paid them, and I haven't been on Tinder since, but back then, if you paid them, I think it was like $35, you could move your geolocator. And so what I did is I became really the world's foremost authority on Tinder dating profiles for people over whatever their max age was, which I think was 45. And so I spent, 2 or 3 months. Anytime you saw me, I was on my phone, and I forget which the way the swipe goes. I think I didn't ever swipe right. It was always left. And if it was something that was like a good picture, I would just screen shoot it. And then additionally, you'd get people's interest in what they wanted to do. And you just know they're going to lie about their age or other stuff, but they're not going to lie about stuff like horseback riding or something, right? That would be a disaster. You go on a date with somebody who says they love horseback riding, they've never been on a horse. So yeah, what happened was at the end of this period, I had thousands and thousands of pictures of people our age that I had put together from Tinder, and it looked awesome. And that's one of the ways that we started AGEIST. Like people would, in the beginning, they're like, what does this look like? And I was able to pull up a couple hundred pictures and say, hey, it looks like this. So go Tinder. This week on the show, we're going to be talking to Elli Kaplan, and she has a product called Neurotrack, which is about cognitive health. It's about cognitive testing, and I have some very strong feelings about this. Well, I'll just tell you up front, I think cognitive testing should become as common as getting a physical or going to your dentist, and you should not be getting a driver's license unless you've had a cognitive test, because a cognitive test is going to pull up, are you overmedicated on something? Alcohol problems? Do you have some other brain disease that we need to know about before you operate a piece of heavy machinery and you're driving it down the road at 60 miles an hour? So we're going to talk all about this and how this works. I think it's a super interesting development, and I'm very much hoping that this becomes normalized. So we're going to talk about Neurotrack and cognitive testing in just a moment after a quick word from our sponsors. Did you know that hair loss affects over 80 million Americans? Divi has created a range of hair care products designed exactly for thinning hair. All of Divi's products come together to create a full daily solution that helps both men and women nourish their hair to get to the root of scalp health. Some of their ingredients include copper tripeptide, tea tree oil, amino acids, and hyaluronic acid. Do you want to take back control of your hair and scalp health and do it with clean, science-backed ingredients? Well, we have a special offer for the AGEIST and SuperAge audiences. Go to diviofficial.com/ageist or enter AGEIST at checkout for 20% off your first order. That's diviofficial.com/ageist for 20% off your first order. Hydration is not just about pounding water. We have to have some electrolytes in there, specifically sodium, potassium, and magnesium. My favorite electrolyte mix, the one that I use every day, is LMNT, LMNT. You know, one of the things that I learned last year was the importance of sodium. We may actually not be getting enough sodium. And I know there was a lot of sodium fear out there. And it's true, if you have hypertension or are pre-hypertensive, you do want to check with your doctor. But for most of us, having sodium actually helps us to absorb water. And in fact, drinking straight water without any minerals in it, we will be pulling the electrolytes out of our system. Go to drinkelement.com/ageist. That's drinklmnt.com/ageist. Get a free 8-serving sample pack with your next order. My favorite one is citrus salt. What's yours? Let me know. Quick reminder to stay tuned after we finish talking about Neurotrack and cognitive health. We're going to do just try this, that little tidbit to hopefully make your life a little happier, a little better. So stay tuned for that. Hey, Elli, how you doing today?
I'm good. Thanks, David. Thanks for having me.
Oh, it's great to have you on. So today we're going to talk about a test you created, which is, I call it a cognition test, but what would you call it?
That's what we call it too. We call it a cognition test.
A cognition test. Awesome. And tell us a little bit about your background and how you came to develop this test.
Well, it depends on how far you want to go back. I will say it's important to go back a bit because I was raised by probably you'd call them a couple of hippies now. My dad was a pediatrician who worked in the Indian Health Service, and he went into the Indian Health Service during the Vietnam War. And so I spent my early childhood up until actually around 7th grade living on and around Native American Indian reservations and really getting a sense of how healthcare operated, from a child's perspective, but nonetheless, and the need for access. And I think that really deeply influenced my thinking and went into how we think about cognitive testing and cognitive health. Fast forward to post college, I was working in government. I worked in the Clinton administration at the White House, State and Treasury departments, again, with a lens of public policy, went into finance, and then worked at the UN for a bit before going to business school. And when I was in business school, leading up to business school, my grandfather, who was also a doctor, started to show signs of Alzheimer's disease. And so, here we were, this family of healthcare providers. We went to try to get him diagnosed, and it was next to impossible to really understand what was going on with his cognitive health. Fast forward a few years later, my grandmother on the other side of my family started to show signs. And, I remember talking to my dad about it, and we were sort of like, well, this has got to be a little bit easier now. We'll just go get her tested and we'll get a diagnosis, and then there must be some form of treatment. And literally nothing had changed. And it struck me, thinking about it with these various previous hats on of public policy, access to healthcare, aging population, economic impact, and finance, that there was both a massive need to people who may be in the same boat as us, as well as a huge opportunity. And so it was then that I started looking around for better tools, met my co-founders who were neuroscientists at Emory University at the time, who had developed a technology that we use as part of later stage testing, but tools that could better identify people who are at risk for cognitive decline and Alzheimer's disease. So we started the company, we raised some capital, and fast forward to where we are today.
I had the opportunity to take the test. I observed the test, so I didn't actually take the test. And as it is now, it's on sort of an iPad device. And my understanding is the way the initial utilization of the test as seen now is to be used, I think, what is it, like 65 and over, your doctor has to ask you, are you cogent, and have some kind of evaluation. But this evaluation can cut into the amount of time that the doctor has been allocated to spend with you. So this is something that can be like a pre-screen before you meet the doctor, and so you get time with the doctor. Did I get that right?
Yeah, that's right. And fortunately, it's a bit more rigorous now than just the doctor asking you, are you cogent? CMS, which is the government agency that governs Medicare, has put in place new regulations that says that doctors must actually give a cognitive test. And to your point exactly, the issue is that the historical tests, which are these very antiquated pen and paper tests, which have all kinds of problems around bias and accuracy and other things, are also quite long. And so, when you are a primary care doctor and all you have is 20 minutes with each patient, to then have to contemplate conducting a 15 to 20-minute test, that's just one small piece of the work, that just doesn't work. So we developed specifically for primary care this shorter tool that fits very neatly within clinical workflows. Just as you said, you can either take it ahead of the visit, or you can take it after you've had your other vitals collected, things like weight, height, blood pressure, that sort of thing. Then you take our test.
Yeah, and I just want to say, like, the test involves like numbers and symbols and matching and in a certain amount of time, and that this is something that, should you score low, you have a cognitive issue, which may or may not be dementia related, Alzheimer's related, but could also be indicative of overmedication or something else. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, the test is specific to brain function.
Mm-hmm.
So we're measuring things like attention, brain processing speed, executive function, memory. And sometimes those things can be impacted by overmedication. And we know that so often, at all different ages, but particularly when you get older, there's a tendency to just start prescribing lots of different things and not coordinating how those medications are interacting. And so that can have an impact on score and cognitive ability.
One of the things I thought was interesting about this was that it's a cognition test. This is not a test for Alzheimer's or dementia. So that this could be used, too much information here, but I have like a microvascular issue with one of my toes. And it has to do, I have like capillary spasming, which causes something called pernio. So I spoke to my docs last week, and I now have a way to cause this to happen without, it's generally cold that causes it, but I found another way so I can control it and I can cause it to happen if I choose. And I said, this is great. We can run an experiment as to what we can do. And they're like, okay, well, we're just going to give you the full stack of everything that can possibly stop this. And I said, well, like, what's going to happen to me if you give me all this at once? And he's like, you might get a headache, a little dizzy. Well, I would have failed your cognition test because my blood pressure was like way down and I couldn't think correctly. But so I can see that this would be really useful in there. I think one of the things about, and I want to talk a little bit about greater use of these cognition tests, because I think people are very scared about, and sort of rightfully so, if you have Alzheimer's, this is a very scary thing. Your life is going to be very different, and so there's a tendency to not want to know. But that's just one thing that can interfere with cognition. There's a lot of things out there.
Right.
My thinking on this after I took the test, it became a little more broad, and I thought, well, why is it that the DMV wants to check my eyes, but they don't want to check my cognitive ability, which you would think would be top of mind, right? So
you would think.
This test that I saw is a 3-minute test. It takes about as long as a vision test. What is your thought on this? Like, can we get this into you should be able to think, you can try to drive.
No, trust me, you are preaching to the choir in that we know that as people's cognitive health declines, they become a risk for all kinds of issues. It's not, it goes well beyond. DMV is central, and you hear these horror stories of seniors mistaking the gas for the brake and the brake for the gas and plowing into crowds of people. And, there absolutely it should sit in the DMV. It should also sit with your financial advisor. It should also sit with, a whole host of others. We also, just given the space that we work in, hear stories of people who are declining cognitively and transfer their entire life savings to some small nonprofit that, is working on an issue that their kids didn't know anything about, and now they're wiped out financially. So, cognitive health is core. It's fundamental to absolutely everything. And, I would say that this is where the cynical side of healthcare and just our society in general kind of clicks in a bit. The problem is that because we haven't had drugs for, broadly speaking, that are considered disease modifying for cognitive decline, for Alzheimer's disease, there has been a lack of focus across all of these different industries and verticals. And I think that is now starting to shift. It would be wonderful if at age 65 you could show up the DMV, and after you take your eye test, you take a cognitive test, and it spits out, the person sitting behind the desk who may not be equipped to have those conversations. They don't have to have that conversation, right? It just says, "Sorry, Charlie, you're not eligible."
I don't even think it should be age-based. I think that
Sure.
you should just take this test if you want to drive a car. Tell me about, is there utility for a test like this in sports, post-traumatic brain injury?
Yeah.
So can this be used diagnostically that way?
Yes, it can. So backing up a little bit, as you mentioned, the way that our tests have been designed, developed, and clinically and scientifically validated is to test cognitive domains. So all the things that we just talked about: attention, executive function, brain processing speed. So because we're not a test for Alzheimer's or a test for ADHD, because we test all brain function, we can use these tests or repurpose them for other kinds of issues. And so certainly concussions and traumatic brain injury that could come from sports or could come from jumping out of an airplane because you're in the military. And, so lots of applications in the education space. I think it's very early days. I mean, we've been around for quite some time now, working hard on these issues. It's early days for really pushing cognitive tests across all of these different areas. And I think this next decade is going to be the decade of the brain. And I think it's just going to be unbelievably exciting to think about how we can equip people, regardless of age, regardless of income level, regardless of anything else, to have a much better understanding of their brain health, their cognitive function, and then things that they can do about them, right?
Yeah. As we're talking, I'm thinking one of the primary applications of this would be in the US Senate. And I wonder how many of them would pass this. This is not a political broadcast, but clearly there's some people there that have maybe should not be doing what they're doing.
Yeah. Dianne Feinstein passed away. She was obviously declining cognitively. We know that Mitch McConnell, he's had probably some TIA strokes when he froze up and could no longer speak. So those are the people that create policy and create laws. Let's also think about people who are performing surgery. I met with the dean of Johns Hopkins Medical School many years ago, and he said, honestly, I want this for my doctors. I want to know that if you hit a certain age, that you become aware that you're going to get a cognitive test. And if you don't pass it, you can't show up in the operating room anymore. So there are lots of different industries where this is critical. And I think we're at the beginning of starting to see some changes there.
I have a company called AGEIST, so we're kind of sensitive about this stuff, but
yes, sorry. Any, right? Okay. So you could be, here's another example. We know that alcohol abuse or drug abuse creates all kinds of cognitive issues. So regardless of age, people should be getting tested. Truck drivers, anyone who is performing any kind of work or personal things where this could become an issue.
I think that's right. And for some reason, this cognitive testing, it's interesting to me how it's sort of shunted off into this other, I don't want to know sort of area. Whereas things like dentistry, right? Like we go to the dentist every year, or I go to the dentist twice a year. I get my teeth cleaned. That's just, okay, great.
Good.
This is something we do,
Actually, it's important for your brain health. There's a connection between oral health and brain health.
And that's why I use a water pick every night. Happy gums, happy brain. Hearing testing sort of falls into this camp that a lot of people just don't want to know. And of course, hearing loss is directly correlated with brain health, but a lot of people won't do it for one reason or another. And no, I don't have any sympathy for that. You should just do it. I'm sorry. You should just do this. And I think that, cognitive testing, and I'm sort of wondering why this is like I would have loved to have had speed of processing tests given to me at like 20, 30, 40, 50, 60. And, because these things exist. And for me to be able to just see like, oh, okay, I feel my brain works differently now than it did then. And allegedly it works better in certain ways. I have better pattern recognition, but I'm probably a little slower at other things. But I would love to see like that graph decade by decade, but there's no, like that doesn't happen the way my LDL is tracked. Like I've got a very comprehensive graph of my LDL, but I have no record of my cognitive stuff. So why do we put that in a different category?
It's a great question. I mean, when I started this company and met with some very future focused venture capitalists, and Peter Thiel, love him or hate him, from Founders Fund, led our seed round along with Social Capital, Chamath Palihapitiya, both very visionary when it comes to the future. And they saw it and they understood, the value of getting cognitive testing, not just for understanding your progression from a function perspective, but also for things like drug development. And so, I think it's critical. The problem has been that it's really difficult outside of a direct to consumer or a concierge medicine like business model. It's hard to get systems to pay for it, and what you want is population level activity, right? So I think if you're able to afford to see a concierge medicine starting in your 20s, you probably will get cognitive testing, but for the rest of the group you don't, and I think that's a disservice.
That's very interesting to me. Maybe where this comes from is this idea of, I'm not politically correct, so I'm going to say dumb people. This is not about that. This is not an intelligence test. This is a cognitive test, and it's a very different thing. So you can potentially be very smart, very high IQ, but you've been poorly prescribed something, and your cognitive ability goes down, which, right? It's a different thing.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. No, that's exactly right. This is not an IQ test. This is a cognitive function test.
Right.
And everybody should want to understand how their brain is functioning, and if there are issues that you could then fix. And that may be, as you point out, that you're on too many medications that are conflicting with each other. It may also be that you are eating fried food 7 days a week and you're not sleeping and you never exercise. So, there's an aspect of preventative medicine. Historically, we haven't had good drugs or even good supplements or whatever, from a treatment perspective for cognitive issues. I think that is also starting to change, at least on the lifestyle side. We know that there's a tremendous amount of things that you can do to help your brain function. And, because I have a family history of Alzheimer's, and obviously because I spend all day and night working on this, I'm very focused on it. And sometimes I slip up. Last night I had a bowl of ice cream and I woke up this morning and I felt slower. The sugar in the ice cream makes a difference. And if I don't, I no longer drink a lot for the same reason. If I have a glass of wine the next day, my body doesn't feel great, but my brain is what is most impacted. And so as we start to think about, we've had this mantra of what's good for your heart, because of the cardiovascular, all the money that has gone into cardiovascular health and the campaigns and the advocacy group. What's good for your heart is good for the rest of your body. It's also true, and I would say maybe more important, that they're both pretty important, but what's good for your brain is good for the rest of your body. And if you really start to look at things through the lens of taking care of your brain health, everything else sorts out. And we know that, I took your quiz before.
Oh, yeah. What are you? Well, I know what you are. You're an owl. I could have told you that earlier.
All right.
Anybody who's studying brain science, you're an owl.
Okay. Dig into what that means. But I do a lot of those things around. What I was going to say is metformin, which is a diabetes drug. is also seen as a drug that's very good for longevity. For women, hormone replacement therapy, very good for cognitive decline. So I think, as we get more aware as broadly, as a society about how all these things can impact your brain, but also your other aspects of your health, we'll start to see more acceptance around the need for cognitive testing in lots of different places.
You don't have to answer this question. I was just curious. Have you tested for the APOE4 allele?
I have tested, and I don't have the gene, which is sort of remarkable because I have a lot of Alzheimer's in my family. What's pretty exciting, though, is there have been some new studies just in the last couple of years that are one of many that show that even if you do have the gene, that lifestyle plays a role.
100%.
So,
yeah.
Yep. So having the gene is scary, sure, but there's so much you can do about it. And maybe that motivates you a bit more.
That's where I was going to go with this, that just because you have the gene, even if you have 2 copies of the gene, if you do things, you get your blood sugar under control, stop with the alcohol, increase your exercise, you can delay or prevent the onset of the disease.
That's right.
As I understand, so the cognitive test means that we'll just say worst case. My wife would say, she's like, well, what's wrong with your brain? You forgot your keys or whatever. She's lovely. So is this specific test, if we're testing for here is cognitive issues, and we think that these cognitive issues are related to brain disease of some kind, if we test indicating disease, this is an advanced form of the disease, right? Like there's like something wrong happening here.
Yeah. What's considered in this space as advanced is mild cognitive impairment, moving to moderate cognitive impairment, and then to Alzheimer's disease. There obviously there are stages before that, subjective memory complaint with worry, where you are forgetting your car keys a lot, and so much so that you notice it's a big issue, which is not to say that that's what you have, obviously. I'm quite sure whatever, we all probably do at certain times in our life. But it's not a test where if you are 35 and you have a crystal ball and the crystal ball says, at age 85 or 75, you'll enter into one of those stages, that we could detect it. We hope for that. And I think longer term, as the systems come into place for testing earlier at scale, and when I say systems, that often means like health insurance or providers, doctors who build it into their workflows, and you can get somebody to start either preventing through lifestyle, or if there are more drugs that would make sense, then absolutely. But today, the focus really is on finding people who are later stage, but still early enough to be able to do something.
I'm not a doctor. I'm not a scientist. I'm going to throw out some words that I have heard. So they're PET scans. I believe there are blood-based markers that can test, I think, can show some indications of early Alzheimer's and such, where people can take action. And I'm guessing with your test, if I was a physician and somebody scored low cognitively, I would probably say, oh, well, let's see what's going on here. And
that's right.
Leading down some other tests.
2 of the biggest sort of hallmarks for Alzheimer's disease, pathological hallmarks, don't necessarily have to be, but can be what they call plaques and tangles. And the plaques are amyloid protein that builds up in the brain, and the tangles are tau tangles. And so these tests that you mentioned, PET scans, also a spinal tap, lumbar puncture, can identify amyloid or tau in the brain. There are some blood tests that are coming onto the market. I just heard it's still early days for a lot of those blood tests, but yes, if somebody gets flagged by our test, before actually we would get to that stage, the doctor would actually do more comprehensive cognitive testing. So we have other products besides that, or in addition to the 3-minute screening test. We have our screening test, and then we have a more comprehensive set of tests that a doctor can use to say, okay, you got flagged by the screener test. Here in our office, we want to do a little more testing to try to better understand, is this something that would need a neurologist to take a look at, or is this something that is maybe not as much of an issue? So they would do that more comprehensive testing. We also have a program that takes all that great stuff in lifestyle and it's actually a clinically validated program that we've put through longitudinal studies that the NIH funded to show what that gives everybody the information and the tools in order to take a proactive approach for the brain health. So if they don't go on to neuro, then they'll get enrolled into that program and be given everything that they need to try to prevent.
We had somebody who's now one of my friends, Dr. Rudy Tanzi, who's head of neurology at Mass General. At the young age of 22, he discovered the early Alzheimer's gene. And I asked him this question. I said, so why is it that there seems to be this sort of selective memory fail at about age 60 with name recall? Like, what's up with that, Rudy? He says, well, I have the same problem. And I said, what do you do about it? He's like, well, I don't know. It's just sort of a thing that happens. Do you have any thoughts on this?
I've always been really bad with names. I'm a very visual person. So, if I saw you walking in a mall in the middle of like Columbus, Ohio, I would remember you, but I would be like, oh, I know that guy and I've met with him, but what's his name? And then it would come to me eventually. Word recall. And in fact, there are a lot of cognitive tests around word recall. They call them the wordless memory test. But that is something that does happen kind of often in midlife. I try really hard when I meet somebody new, because I'm visual, to focus on their face and to repeat the name a few times. And that tends to be helpful. I think that, there's something about mindfulness and presence that goes with cognitive function. And so if you can really, for me anyway, focus on being present where you are and taking note of who you're with and the name, that tends to help me a little bit. But I don't know, it's a tough one. And if Rudy Tanzi can't answer that, certainly I'm not going to do a better job.
Yeah, it's interesting what you said, like this is the decade of the brain. And as I think about this, we had Dr. Richard Davidson. See, I recall that name.
Very good.
His Healthy Minds program, which I think is brilliant. And he comes out of neurology. This idea of presence, meditation is becoming much more to the forefront. And like psychedelics are being talked about today in a way like even a year ago, it was rather, I was in a sauna last night. We have a very social sauna where I live at the gym. And
how lovely.
So the conversation was like, started at breath work. And then people are like, talking about their ayahuasca experiments and low dosing psilocybin. And this is just like sort of normal. These are not like out there people. How common this sort of discussion is. And this is really part and parcel to your field, what you're talking about, the, brain stuff. I have some strong feelings about the field that I won't share. I think he's right about this.
I agree. And I think, what's interesting is we're starting to see more money, both public and private, flowing into research and into companies that are trying to develop things in a similar way. I think, there's a lot of work to be done and rigorous work that needs to be done, because the last thing you want is someone, going on a bad trip and never returning and not having the right guides or, recommendations. But it's fascinating, and it just speaks to the beauty and the wonder of the brain. And I think, it's pretty exciting. I know people who, this is different, but who have serious depression. And then went on a protocol of ketamine.
Yeah.
And it was life-changing.
Yep.
So, I just think there's so much about the brain that we don't know, that we're learning every day. And no pun intended, we have to keep an open mind to it because it could be life-changing for lots of people.
I'm still sort of puzzling about the societal resistance to cognitive testing, but I've worked with a lot of young people, and their openness about things like therapy or gender, all these things, for us, were just like total third rail, like do not go there. And they're just like bantering about an open conversation. And I think that's, I can see them having zero resistance to, oh, you want me to take a cognitive test? Oh, interesting. Yeah, let's do that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny. At our company, obviously we do a lot of product testing. We do a lot of user testing on people who are older, given that that's our, the majority of our population who take the test, to make sure that it works for them. But, we also end up like testing our kids and trying things out. And there's just as you say, like an openness to all of these things that never existed before. It's really, I think it's very exciting.
I just want to touch on Japan. Japan's my favorite country in the whole world. I think it's an amazing, amazing place. They're just like more evolved than we are. They're higher on Maslow's pyramid. So, but what you notice immediately, like when you land there, is the age range of people who work in sort of like, what would you call it? Like going through like passport control and that sort of stuff.
Yep.
The age range, low end, maybe 20, high end, I don't know, mid 90s. So as we get into this, we're preventing a lot of diseases. We're having, people are living longer. Japan probably being the forefront of this. Is there any interest in Japan with a test like this?
Yes, and we've actually worked commercially in Japan for a while now. That was because they were so much more advanced when it came to understanding the need for cognitive testing and the role of prevention and the role of research. And so we actually launched in Japan before we launched in the US from a B2B perspective. And I think there is just a different understanding of age and aging there than exists today, or that exists in the U.S. rather. And so working in Japan was fun. It's an incredible country. I had the privilege of being able to go there quite a lot pre-COVID to work with our customers there. And I think to a certain degree, it's cultural, but to another degree, it was about their economy. And because so many, it's a country that has the largest aging population in the world. People live much longer there. And they're not growing from a population perspective as rapidly as some other countries. It was a real need to ensure that people, as they get older, can continue to work so that they can have people who stamp passports and, people are needed to work.
I just want to wrap up here and let people know I'm so bad at promotion. The name of your company is Neurotrack, and
Correct.
You never mentioned it. So one demerit for the podcast host.
We can do it at the beginning and the end.
If somebody wants to get in touch with you,
Yep.
or wants to tell their doc, like, hey, why don't you have this thing? What do they do?
Well, I always give out my email because I love to hear from people. So they can email me. It's Elli, ELLI, at neurotrack.com, NEUROTRACK. Or they can go to our website, and there are forms that you can fill out to get in touch. But, we love to hear from people who are, concerned about their health. They're not concerned. They just like what we're doing, or they want their doctor to start using it. Please get in touch.
That'd be great. It's a great product. And I really appreciate the science behind it. And what I really like about your product, ease of use. Like
That's right.
Right. It's 3 minutes on a pad. Like, it's not that hard.
Well, David, thank you so much for saying that, because our product team is spectacular. And our design, that's building the product, but also designing the product. And then obviously the clinical team to validate it. But you wouldn't believe the amount of work and energy and passion that has gone into making it easy. We want this to be a stress-free experience for people, so that they come back and they test again, and we start to get that longitudinal data that you talked about.
That's right. Right. Great job, product dev team. Awesome.
Thank you.
Elli, it has been wonderful having you on the show today.
Thank you, David.
And we're going to put all your contact information and a link to your website in the show notes. And I think that this is the decade of the brain. And I'm really looking forward to going in to the DMV and them saying like, okay, you can see, but can you think? Take this 3-minute test. I would love that. Yeah.
Yeah, me too. And I just want to say thank you so much for having me. Thank you for this podcast. It's wonderful that you're out there doing this, and I'm excited to continue to listen.
Very well. Thanks for joining us today.
All right. Take care.
Bye now.
Bye-bye.
That was a great conversation. And I think it's really, as I said earlier, something that I would really like to see normalized out in the world. People of all ages taking cognitive tests, and cognitive tests are not the same as IQ tests. It's not about how smart, it's how your brain's working. And possibly I could see a test out there where, it's like, oh, this part of your brain is not working as well. It doesn't mean you have some kind of brain disease, but maybe you could work on this. And there's probably things we could do to help with that. I look forward to that future. After a quick word from our sponsor, we're going to do Just Try This. Today's show is also brought to you by Inside Tracker, the dashboard to your inner health. I'm a big believer in getting blood tests taken because it's simply the only way to get in-depth data about your metabolic factors, your hormones, and the things that inform your immediate and long-term health. There are also excellent DNA tests that can further inform you about your immediate and long-term health. The problem is that most blood tests out there is you get a lot of information back and you get a lot of numbers, and they're not really going to tell you what to do about it. In addition, they can be very confusing, what all the factors are, what they mean. Inside Tracker has a dashboard and a platform that simplifies all of that. I get food first, supplements second recommendations about how to optimize my inner health. For instance, I just got my test back and I saw that my calcium levels were a little low, which were surprising to me. But I have suggestions now about how to correct that. And I would not have known that had I not done an Inside Tracker blood test. Go to insidetracker.com/ageist, save 20% on all their products today. This week on Just Try This, my suggestion is let's pay a little more attention to awareness, to attention. What are we paying attention to? And my suggestion is to just sit quietly for, not a long time, maybe a couple minutes, and just listen to what's going on around you. What are the sounds you're hearing around you? And of course, your mind will wander. There'll be some other thoughts come in, stuff like that, monkey mind. That's okay. Just let them go and pay attention to the sounds that are around you. This idea of awareness, becoming more aware, gets us more present, which helps us better with the things we want to do during the day and improves our relationships. So maybe just sit quietly for a couple minutes. What are you hearing? What are the sounds out there? That's this week's tip. Next week, we've got another great show. Oh my God, we've been on a roll. And here's where I need your help. I'm just going to ask everybody for a favor. Share this podcast with someone that you think can use it. We would love that. That's really the only way people find out about us. And if you really want an extra gold star, leave us a rating, iTunes, wherever you're listening to this show. That would be wonderful. You can also leave us a comment. We love comments. If you want to get in touch with me, David at SuperAge.com. I answer all of my email promptly and directly. Until next week, everyone, have a wonderful week, and we'll see you then. Take care now.